I stood in my parents' living room on Thanksgiving Day, watching my sister Claire address our entire extended family with tears streaming down her face. "Dad almost died because Amber refused to help pay for his surgery," she said, her voice breaking perfectly. "She has all that money, and she turned her back on her own father." 23 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me with disgust and disappointment. But what they didn't know was that I had the hospital payment records in my purse, and I was about to show everyone exactly who the liar was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from 6 months earlier when everything started falling apart. My name is Amber Torres, and I'm 32 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, where I work as a senior software engineer for a tech company downtown. I've been with the company for 8 years, working my way up from junior developer to team lead. The job pays well, really well, and I've been careful with my money since the day I started earning it. My younger sister, Claire, is 28 and has never held a steady job for more than a year. She's tried being a real estate agent, a personal trainer, a social media consultant, and about 5 other careers that never quite worked out. Our parents, especially our mother, always had an excuse ready. Claire is still finding herself. Claire is exploring her options. Claire just needs more time. Growing up in Phoenix, I learned early that Claire and I lived by different rules. I got my first job at 15, working weekends at a grocery store while Claire got an allowance for doing basically nothing. When I turned 16 and wanted a car, Dad told me I'd need to save up and buy one myself. When Claire turned 16 2 years later, they bought her a nearly new Honda with a bow on top. I didn't complain much back then. I figured that's just how families worked sometimes. Parents had favorites, even if they didn't admit it. Besides, I liked earning my own money. It made me feel independent and capable. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved enough to pay for my first year of community college without asking my parents for a single dollar. Claire, on the other hand, went straight to Arizona State University on our parents' dime. She lasted 3 semesters before dropping out because, according to Mom, the pressure was too much for her sensitive nature. I transferred to ASU after 2 years of community college, paid my own tuition through a combination of scholarships, loans, and part-time work, and graduated with honors in computer science. After college, I moved into a small apartment near downtown Phoenix and started working entry-level tech jobs. The pay wasn't great at first, but I was building experience and skills. Claire moved back home and cycled through her various career attempts while Mom and Dad covered her expenses. They paid her car insurance, her phone bill, her credit cards, everything. By the time I was 27, I had paid off my student loans completely and saved enough for a down payment on a small house in a decent neighborhood. It wasn't anything fancy, just a 3-bedroom ranch-style place that needed some work, but it was mine. I closed on the house in March, 5 years ago, and felt incredibly proud of what I'd accomplished. My parents came to see the house exactly once. Mom walked through quickly, making comments about how small the rooms were and how much work the kitchen needed. Dad nodded politely but seemed distracted. They stayed maybe 20 minutes before leaving. Claire didn't come at all. She was busy with whatever job she had that month. I threw myself into fixing up the house. I learned how to paint walls properly, how to install new light fixtures, how to refinish hardwood floors. YouTube became my best friend. Every weekend, I worked on some new project, slowly transforming that little house into something beautiful. My coworkers would joke about how I always had paint under my fingernails or drywall dust in my hair. Meanwhile, Claire was still living at home rent-free. She'd be 23 by then, working part-time at a yoga studio and talking about maybe getting certified as an instructor. Mom and Dad supported this plan enthusiastically, even though Claire had never stuck with anything long enough to actually complete a certification program. The pattern continued for years. I advanced in my career, got promoted twice, bought a newer car, built up my savings and retirement accounts. Claire drifted from job to job, relationship to relationship, always landing back at Mom and Dad's house when things didn't work out. And our parents never seemed to mind. They'd always welcome her back with open arms and open wallets. I tried not to let it bother me. I had my own life, my own success, my own sense of accomplishment. I didn't need their approval or their money. But sometimes, during family dinners, I'd catch myself feeling that old familiar sting when Mom would spend 20 minutes talking about Claire's latest business idea while barely asking about my recent promotion. About 2 years ago, Claire started dating a guy named Kyle. He was 35, worked in sales for a car dealership, and seemed pleasant enough at first. They moved fast, getting engaged after just 4 months. Mom was thrilled, immediately diving into wedding planning mode. She'd call me occasionally to talk about venues and guest lists, always making it clear that Claire deserved the wedding of her dreams. The wedding was expensive, really expensive. Mom and Dad paid for everything, the venue at a fancy resort outside Scottsdale, the catering for 200 guests, the designer wedding dress, the open bar, the band, the photographer. I estimated they spent at least $60,000, maybe more. When I got married at 25 to my ex-husband, they'd given us $2,000 and told us to keep it simple. Claire's marriage to Kyle lasted exactly 14 months. She moved back home after catching him cheating with someone from his office. Mom immediately blamed Kyle for everything, never once suggesting that Claire might need to develop some independence or life skills. Dad just went along with whatever Mom said as usual. That was his pattern: keep the peace, avoid conflict, let Mom run the show. I felt bad for Claire when her marriage ended. Nobody deserves to be cheated on. I called her, offered to take her out for coffee, tried to be supportive. She thanked me but said she needed space to heal. That space apparently meant moving back into her childhood bedroom and having Mom wait on her hand and foot while she recovered from her broken heart. 6 months after Claire's divorce was finalized, something happened that changed everything. Dad had a heart attack. It was a Saturday afternoon in April, and he'd been doing yard work when he felt the chest pain start. Mom called 911 immediately, and they rushed him to Phoenix General Hospital. I got Mom's frantic phone call while I was at the grocery store. I dropped everything and drove straight to the hospital, my heart pounding the entire way. Dad had always been healthy, never had any major medical issues, took care of himself reasonably well. The idea of him having a heart attack at only 62 years old terrified me. When I got to the emergency room, Mom was packing in the waiting area and Claire was sitting in a chair, crying into her phone. The doctors stabilized Dad quickly. They ran tests and determined he'd had a moderate heart attack caused by a blocked artery. He'd need surgery, they said, a cardiac catheterization with stent placement to open up the blocked vessel. It was a common procedure, relatively routine, but still serious. The surgery was scheduled for Monday morning, 2 days away. We spent that weekend at the hospital. I took time off work, stayed by Dad's bedside, held his hand while he looked scared and vulnerable in his hospital gown. Mom was a mess, crying constantly, unable to focus on anything. Claire was there too, but mostly on her phone, texting friends about the drama and posting vague updates on social media about family emergencies. On Sunday afternoon, a hospital administrator came to talk to us about the financial aspects of Dad's care. I was in the room along with Mom. Claire had gone to the cafeteria. The administrator, an efficient woman named Mrs. Patterson, explained that the surgery and hospital stay would cost approximately $75,000. Dad's insurance would cover most of it, but his out-of-pocket maximum was $12,000 that he'd need to pay. Mom's face went white. "We don't have $12,000, she whispered. "We used our savings for Claire's wedding, and we haven't built it back up yet." Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically and explained they had payment plans available, but the hospital needed at least half the amount up front before they could schedule the surgery. That meant $6,000 by Monday morning. I didn't hesitate. "I'll pay it," I said immediately. "Whatever Dad needs, I'll cover it." Mom burst into tears and hugged me, thanking me over and over. Mrs. Patterson looked relieved and explained how I could make the payment. I pulled out my credit card right there and paid the $6,000 on the spot. Then I told Mrs. Patterson I'd take care of the remaining $6,000 as well, just bill me directly. "Amber, you don't have to do that," Mom protested, but without much conviction. "We can figure out a payment plan." I shook my head firmly. "Dad needs this surgery. I'm not going to let financial stress delay his treatment. Consider it taken care of." Mom hugged me again, crying harder. In that moment, I felt good about my decision. This was my father, the man who raised me, and I had the money to help him. What else mattered? Claire returned from the cafeteria just as Mrs. Patterson was leaving. "What did she want?" she asked, looking suspicious. Mom explained about the surgery costs and how I'd paid everything. I expected Claire to thank me or at least acknowledge what I'd done. Instead, she just nodded and said, "Oh, that's good," before sitting down and returning to her phone. The lack of gratitude stung a little, but I pushed the feeling aside. Dad's surgery went perfectly on Monday morning. The cardiologist, Dr. Williams, came out afterward to tell us everything had gone well. They'd placed 2 stents, Dad's blood flow was restored, and he should make a full recovery with proper medication and lifestyle changes. We could see him in recovery within the hour. Mom cried with relief, and even Claire looked genuinely happy for the first time that weekend. I stayed at the hospital all day Monday, through Dad's recovery and into the evening when they moved him to a regular room. Tuesday morning, I had to go back to work. I had a major project deadline approaching, and I'd already missed 2 days. Before I left, I stopped by Dad's room. He was awake, looking much better, his color returning to normal. "Thanks for being here, kiddo," he said, squeezing my hand weakly. "Means a lot." "Of course, Dad," I replied, kissing his forehead. "I'll come back tomorrow after work." I wanted to mention paying for the surgery, not to brag, but just to let him know he didn't need to worry about the financial part. But he looked tired, and I figured there'd be time to talk about it later. I waved goodbye and headed to work, feeling grateful that everything had turned out okay. Over the next week, Dad recovered steadily. He came home on Thursday, and Mom fussed over him constantly, making sure he took his medications, ate heart-healthy meals, and didn't overexert himself. I visited several times that week, bringing groceries and helping around the house. Claire was there too, though she seemed more interested in documenting Dad's recovery on social media than actually helping with anything practical. 2 weeks after the surgery, Dad was doing so well that his cardiologist was amazed. "You're recovering better than most patients half your age," Dr. Williams told him at a follow-up appointment. "Keep doing whatever you're doing." Dad beamed with pride, and Mom cried happy tears. I felt relieved that the worst was behind us. That's when things started getting weird. About 3 weeks after Dad's surgery, I noticed Mom and Claire acting strangely around me. They'd stop talking when I entered a room, exchange meaningful glances, whisper to each other when they thought I wasn't looking. At first, I figured they were planning some kind of surprise, maybe a thank you dinner or something to show appreciation for paying the medical bills. I still hadn't received any formal thanks from anyone, which bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Not a card, not a phone call, nothing acknowledging that I'd paid $12,000 for Dad's life-saving surgery. But I tried to be understanding. Everyone processes stress differently, and maybe they just needed time to get back to normal before addressing the financial situation. Then, about a month after the surgery, Mom called me on a Tuesday evening. "Amber, honey, we need to talk," she said, her voice sounding strange, tight, formal. "Can you come over for dinner on Friday?" I agreed, feeling uneasy. Something about her tone made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Is Dad's health all right?" "Dad's fine," Mom replied quickly. "We just need to have a family discussion. Claire will be here too." She hung up before I could ask more questions. I spent the next 3 days worrying about what this family discussion might involve. Maybe they wanted to talk about paying me back, though honestly, I'd written off that money as a gift. Dad's life was worth more than $12,000. Friday evening arrived, and I drove to my parents' house with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I'd stopped at a bakery and picked up Dad's favorite chocolate cake, thinking it might lighten whatever serious mood awaited me. When I walked in, I immediately sensed the tension. Mom was in the kitchen, moving dishes around unnecessarily. Dad sat at the dining table looking uncomfortable. Claire was on the couch, arms crossed, wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "Hi, everyone," I said cheerfully, holding up the cake box. "I brought dessert." Mom barely glanced at it. "Just put it on the counter," she said coolly. My cheerfulness evaporated. This was definitely not going to be a thank you dinner. I set down the cake and sat at the table across from Dad. "So what did you want to discuss?" Mom and Claire exchanged a look. Then Mom sat down, folding her hands on the table in front of her. Amber, we've been talking, and we feel that you need to contribute more to this family. I blinked in confusion. Contribute more? I just paid $12,000 for Dad's surgery. Claire made a scoffing sound from the couch. Oh, here we go, always bringing that up. My mouth fell open. Bringing what up? I literally haven't mentioned it once since I paid it. Mom held up her hand. Let's not argue. The point is, you make good money, Amber. You have a nice house, a good job, savings. Your sister is struggling right now after her divorce. Your father and I are getting older and have medical expenses. We need to stick together as a family. I am sticking together, I said, completely confused now. I paid for Dad's entire surgery out of pocket. What more do you want from me? Claire stood up and walked over to the table. You act like you did this huge favor, she said, her voice dripping with resentment. But you have plenty of money. It wasn't even a sacrifice for you. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad have sacrificed everything for both of us our whole lives. I stared at her in disbelief. Claire, they paid for your entire wedding. They've supported you financially your whole adult life. They bought you a car when you were 16 while I had to save up for mine. How have they sacrificed for me exactly? Her face flushed red. See, this is what you do. You keep score. You hold everything over everyone's heads. You think you're so much better than me because you have a fancy tech job. I don't think I'm better than you, I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. I just work hard and I'm responsible with money, and I was happy to help Dad, but now you're acting like I did something wrong. Mom interrupted before Claire could respond. Nobody said you did anything wrong. We're just saying that going forward, we expect you to help more. Claire needs some financial assistance while she gets back on her feet. We think you should give her $1,000 a month until she's stable. The room went completely silent. I looked from Mom to Claire to Dad, waiting for someone to say they were joking. Nobody did. You want me to give Claire $1,000 a month? I repeated slowly. Yes, Mom said firmly. She's your sister. Family helps family. And what would Claire be doing during this time? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Besides receiving my monthly checks, Claire's eyes flashed with anger. I'm working on starting a business, a wellness coaching practice. It takes time to build a client base. I can't work some mindless job while I'm trying to get my business off the ground. Right, I said, nodding. And how is this different from the real estate thing or the personal training thing or the social media consulting thing? Claire slammed her hand on the table. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're so judgmental, so condescending. You've never supported any of my dreams. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not giving Claire $1,000 a month. I'm happy to help in a crisis like I did with Dad's surgery, but I'm not funding Claire's lifestyle while she figures out her next hobby business. Mom's face hardened. Amber, I'm disappointed in you. Your sister needs help and you're turning your back on her. I looked at Dad, hoping he'd say something reasonable. He just stared at his hands. Did you all discuss this before I got here? I asked. Was this whole dinner just an ambush to pressure me into giving Claire money? Mom's silence was answer enough. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. I love you all, but this is ridiculous. Claire is almost 30 years old. She needs to support herself. Claire's voice followed me out. You're so selfish, Amber. You're just like Dad's family, all about money and status. I drove home shaking with anger and hurt. How had helping my father turned into me being painted as the bad guy? I'd paid $12,000 without hesitation, taken time off work, been at the hospital constantly, and now I was selfish because I wouldn't fund Claire's perpetual unemployment. The injustice of it burned in my chest. For the next few weeks, I didn't hear from my family at all. No calls, no texts, nothing. I tried reaching out to Dad once, but Mom answered his phone and said he was busy. The silence hurt more than I expected. Despite everything, they were still my family. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn their approval, and apparently I'd failed completely. Then in late June, my Aunt Marie called. She was Dad's older sister, lived in Tucson, and I'd always liked her. We weren't super close, but she'd always been kind to me. Amber, honey, I wanted to check on you, she said, her voice concerned. Your mother called me last week with some disturbing information, and I wanted to hear your side of the story. My stomach dropped. What did Mom tell you? There was a pause. She said that when your father had his heart attack, you refused to help pay for his surgery. She said they had to drain their savings and go into debt because you told them it wasn't your responsibility. I nearly dropped the phone. Aunt Marie, that's completely false, I said, my voice shaking. I paid $12,000 for Dad's surgery. I have the credit card statements and hospital receipts to prove it. There was a long silence on the other end. You paid for it, Aunt Marie finally asked. The whole amount. I explained everything, the out-of-pocket costs, my immediate offer to help, the payment I'd made to Mrs. Patterson at the hospital. I didn't hesitate for a second, Aunt Marie. Dad needed surgery and I had the money. Of course I paid. Aunt Marie sighed heavily. Amber, I'm so sorry. Your mother painted a very different picture. She said you refused to help, that Claire had to step up and handle everything. My blood ran cold. Claire didn't pay anything. She wasn't even in the room when the financial discussion happened. She was in the cafeteria. Another long pause. Your mother said Claire paid for the surgery out of her savings from her divorce settlement. Now I was furious. Claire didn't get a settlement. Kyle didn't have any money. And even if she had received money, she didn't pay for anything related to Dad's surgery. I have documentation proving I made the payments. Aunt Marie's voice was troubled when she spoke again. Amber, I think you need to know that your mother has been calling other family members with the same story. She's been telling everyone that you abandoned your father in his time of need. After I hung up with Aunt Marie, I sat in stunned silence for a long time. My own mother was spreading lies about me to the entire family. Lies that made me look heartless and cruel. Lies that made Claire look like a hero. But why? What could they possibly gain from this? I spent the weekend trying to figure out the angle. Then it hit me. If the family believed I'd refused to help Dad, they'd understand why Mom and Claire were so upset with me. They'd agree I was selfish. They'd put pressure on me to make amends, probably financially. It was all about money and control. Monday morning, I called the hospital billing department. Hi, this is Amber Torres. I need copies of all payment records related to my father's surgery in April. The billing representative was helpful. Of course, Ms. Torres. I can email you a detailed breakdown of all charges and payments. Can you verify your father's information? I provided Dad's details, confirmed my identity, and within an hour, I had a comprehensive PDF in my inbox. The documents were crystal clear. Every charge, every payment, every date. My credit card number appeared on all payment records. The total I'd paid was exactly $12,000, split between the initial $6,000 upfront payment and the remaining $6,000 2 weeks later. There was no other payment source listed. No mysterious contribution from Claire. Just me. I printed 3 copies of everything. One for my records, one to send to Aunt Marie, and one to keep in my car just in case. Then I started making phone calls to other relatives. My Uncle Tom, Dad's brother, my cousin Jessica, my grandmother in Tucson. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They'd heard I refused to help Dad. They were shocked when I told them the truth and offered to send proof. By the end of the week, I'd contacted 12 family members. All of them had been told the same lie. All of them believed Claire had been the hero who stepped up when I wouldn't, and all of them were horrified when they learned the truth. Why would your mother lie about something like this? Uncle Tom asked, sounding genuinely confused. What does she gain? I'd been asking myself the same question. The answer seemed to be that Mom was trying to justify pressuring me for money. If everyone believed I was already a selfish daughter who'd abandoned Dad, they'd support Mom's demands that I contribute more to the family. It was manipulation on a scale I hadn't thought possible from my own mother. June turned into July. The Arizona heat was brutal, and so was the silence from my parents' house. Then in mid-July, I got a text from Claire. Family dinner this Sunday. Mom wants everyone there. 2 p.m., don't be late. No please, no friendly tone, just a command. I thought about ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. What were they planning now? I texted back a simple, I'll be there, and spent the next 2 days mentally preparing for whatever ambush awaited. Sunday arrived, hot and bright. I dressed in jeans and a nice blouse, wanting to look put together, but not like I was trying too hard. I grabbed my purse, made sure I had those hospital records in my car just in case, and drove to my parents' house. When I pulled up, I noticed several cars in the driveway. Uncle Tom's truck, Aunt Marie's sedan, my cousin Jessica's SUV. This wasn't just a family dinner. This was a gathering. My heart started pounding. Something big was happening. and I had a feeling I wasn't going to like it. I walked in to find the living room packed with relatives. Uncle Tom, Aunt Marie, my grandmother, my cousin Jessica and her husband, and a few other aunts and uncles I rarely saw. Everyone stopped talking when I entered. The silence was deafening. Mom stood by the fireplace with Claire beside her. Dad sat in his recliner looking uncomfortable. "Amber, come in," Mom said, her voice falsely warm. "We're all here to discuss this situation as a family." I stayed near the door, keeping my exit route clear. "What situation?" Claire stepped forward, and I noticed she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, her expression wounded. "The situation where you've been telling lies about me to the family." My jaw dropped. "Excuse me, you're the one who's been lying." Mom held up her hand. "Let's all stay calm. Claire has something she wants to say." Claire dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I've worked so hard to build a relationship with this family, especially after my divorce, and Amber has been systematically trying to destroy my reputation." She looked around the room at our relatives. "She's been calling everyone, making up stories, trying to turn you all against me. I don't know why she hates me so much." I stood there in complete shock. She was flipping the script, accusing me of exactly what she'd done. "This is unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking. "You've been lying about who paid for Dad's surgery. You've been telling everyone I refused to help when I paid $12,000. Claire's face crumpled. "See, she's doing it again, making everything about money. I never told anyone anything except the truth." Aunt Marie stood up from the couch. "Claire, I spoke with Amber 3 weeks ago. She told me she paid for the surgery. Are you saying that's not true?" Claire's expression shifted to something calculating. "Of course she paid eventually, but only after I begged her for days. She made Dad wait in the hospital, refused to help, told Mom and Dad to figure it out themselves. I finally convinced her to do the right thing." My hands clenched into fists. "That is a complete lie. I paid the day we found out about the costs. I was in the room with Mom and the hospital administrator. You were in the cafeteria." Mom stepped forward. "Amber, I think you're misremembering. You were very stressed during that time. Claire was the one who really stepped up." I turned to stare at my mother, this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me not to lie, who was now looking me dead in the eye and gaslighting me about something I absolutely knew happened. "Mom, you hugged me and thanked me when I paid Mrs. Patterson. You were crying. How are you going to stand there and pretend that didn't happen?" Dad finally spoke up from his recliner. "I don't really remember much from that time. I was pretty out of it with the pain medication." Of course he didn't remember. How convenient. Claire turned to the room. "This is what I've been dealing with. Amber rewrites history to make herself look like the hero. The truth is, I used my divorce settlement money to pay for Dad's surgery because my sister refused to help." I'd had enough. I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the hospital right now. Mrs. Patterson can verify everything." Mom's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. "That's not necessary, Amber. We don't need to involve outsiders in family business." I ignored her and dialed the hospital billing department. "Hi, this is Amber Torres. I need to speak with Mrs. Patterson about payment records for my father's surgery in April." The woman who answered explained that Mrs. Patterson was no longer with the hospital, but she could pull up the records. "Can you tell me who made the payments for patient Edward Torres, surgery date April 18th? There was a pause while she looked it up. "Yes, ma'am. All payments were made by Amber Torres on 2 dates, April 17th and May 1st. Credit card ending in 4721. I put the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. "Can you confirm the total amount?" I asked. $12,000 total, the woman confirmed. "Would you like me to email you another copy of the statements?" The room was completely silent. I thanked the woman and hung up. Then I looked at Claire. "Want to explain how you paid for Dad's surgery with your non-existent divorce settlement when my credit card was charged $12,000? Claire's face went red, then white. "I helped in other ways," she stammered. "I was there at the hospital more than you. I took care of Mom and Dad." I turned to address the entire room. "I want everyone here to understand what happened. When Dad had his heart attack, I paid his entire out-of-pocket medical expenses without hesitation. I have the credit card statements, the hospital records, everything documented. Claire has been telling people she paid for it. Mom has been backing up that lie. I want to know why." Mom's expression hardened. "Because you're making your sister look bad. You're always showing off how much money you make, how successful you are. Claire needed to feel valued by this family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you decided to lie and give her credit for something I did, to make her feel valued. Aunt Marie stood up. Karen, this is wrong. If Amber paid for the surgery, she deserves recognition for that. You can't just steal her good deed and give it to Claire. Mom's facade started cracking. You don't understand. Claire has been through so much with her divorce. She needed the family to see her as responsible and caring. Amber doesn't need the attention. She has her career and her house and everything else. The truth was finally coming out. This wasn't about money or family values. This was about Mom's inability to let Claire face any consequences or reality, even if it meant lying about me and stealing my contribution to Dad's medical care. Uncle Tom shook his head slowly. Karen, this is manipulation. You've been telling the family that Amber refused to help Edward. That's a serious accusation, and it's false. Dad finally spoke up again, his voice quiet. I didn't know it had gotten this complicated. I just wanted everyone to get along. I looked at my father, this man I'd rushed to help, whose life I'd helped save, who was now trying to play neutral in a situation where his wife and younger daughter had slandered me to the entire family. Dad, they've been lying about me for months. They told everyone I refused to help you. They gave Claire credit for something I did. And you're sitting there saying you want everyone to get along. He looked down at his hands. Family is important, Amber. Sometimes we have to overlook things. That's when I realized my father was never going to stand up for me. Neither of my parents were. They'd chosen their favorite daughter, and it wasn't me. Claire tried one more tactic. Even if Amber did pay, which I'm not saying she didn't, she only did it to show off, to prove she's better than everyone else. I would have paid if I'd had the money, but I was in a vulnerable place after my divorce. Cousin Jessica spoke up for the first time. But you didn't have the money, Claire, and you've been taking credit for something your sister did. That's not okay. The room erupted in arguments. Some relatives defending me, others trying to mediate, Mom and Claire insisting I was twisting everything. I stood there watching my family tear itself apart over lies my own mother had started. Finally, I held up my hand. I'm done. I came here hopping for an apology. Instead, I got more lies and manipulation. You can all believe whatever you want, but I have proof of what really happened. I pulled the hospital records from my purse and set them on the coffee table. There's documented evidence of every payment I made. Dates, amounts, credit card numbers. If anyone wants the truth, it's right there. Then I looked directly at Claire. I helped Dad because I love him and I had the money to help. You've turned that into some sick competition and made yourself the hero of a story you weren't even part of. That says everything about who you are. Claire burst into tears. You see, she's so mean to me. She's always been jealous because Mom and Dad love me more. The words hung in the air like poison. Mom rushed to comfort Claire, but several relatives looked shocked. Even Dad flinched. Claire, that's not, he started, but he didn't finish the sentence, because it was true and we all knew it. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. Aunt Marie caught my arm. Amber, I'm sorry, I believe you. A lot of us believe you. I nodded, grateful for her support. Thanks, Aunt Marie, but I'm not sure it matters anymore. I walked out of my parents' house and got in my car. As I drove away, I could see them all through the living room window, still arguing, still trying to make sense of a situation that was perfectly clear. My mother had lied to protect my sister's image, and they'd both tried to destroy mine in the process. The next few weeks were strange. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects, staying late at the office. My team lead noticed and pulled me aside. Everything okay, Amber? You've been working crazy hours. I assured him I was fine, just trying to hit some personal goals. But the truth was, work was easier than dealing with the disaster my family had become. Some relatives reached out. Aunt Marie called several times to check on me. Uncle Tom sent a text saying he was sorry for believing the lies. Cousin Jessica invited me to lunch and apologized for not questioning Claire's story sooner. Their support meant something, but it didn't erase the hurt of knowing my own parents had been willing to destroy my reputation to prop up my sister. I didn't hear from Mom, Dad, or Claire at all. The silence should have been a relief, but instead, it just felt empty. I'd lost my family over $12,000 I'd given freely. Actually, I'd lost them over much more than that. I'd lost them because I dared to be successful, to be independent, to not need constant financial and emotional support. In their eyes, that made me the bad guy. August arrived with monsoon storms and temperatures that made stepping outside feel like walking into an oven. I spent my evenings working on house projects, anything to keep busy. I repainted my bedroom, installed new shelving in my garage, learned how to fix a leaky faucet. My house became my refuge, the one place where I felt completely in control. Then, one evening in late August, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Dad standing on my porch, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "Amber, can we talk?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. He walked slowly to my living room and sat on the couch, looking around at the house he'd barely paid attention to 5 years ago. "Your place looks nice. You've done a lot with it." "Thanks," I said, sitting in the chair across from him. I wasn't ready to sit next to him to pretend everything was okay. "What do you want, Dad?" He sighed heavily. "I've been thinking a lot since that family dinner, about what happened, about what your mother and Claire did." He paused, struggling with the words. "I should have stood up for you. I should have told the truth." "Yes, you should have," I said simply. There was no point in sugarcoating it. He looked at his hands. "Your mother, she gets an idea in her head about how things should be, and it's hard to change her mind. She really believes Claire needs extra support, extra help. She thinks you're strong enough to handle being overlooked." I felt anger rising in my chest. So because I'm strong and independent, I deserve to be lied about, to have my good deeds stolen and given to someone else. "No," Dad said quickly. "That's not what I meant. I'm just trying to explain, not excuse it." We sat in silence for a moment. "Dad, I paid for your surgery without hesitation because I love you. I never asked for thanks or recognition. But to have Mom and Claire tell everyone I refused to help, that's not overlooking me. That's actively destroying my reputation." Dad nodded slowly. "I know, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I'm sorry I let things get this far." He looked up at me and I could see tears in his eyes. "The truth is, Amber, I've been a coward. Your mother runs the family, makes all the decisions, and I just go along with it. I convinced myself it was easier that way. But watching what happened to you, seeing how hurt you were at that dinner, I realized I've been letting her hurt you for years." This admission should have made me feel better, but it just made me sad. "So what now, Dad? You're here to apologize, but nothing's going to change. Mom and Claire still think they did nothing wrong." He was quiet for a long moment. "I've asked your mother to go to counseling with me, to work on our communication and our family dynamics. She refused at first, but I told her it wasn't optional. Either we get help or I'm moving out." I stared at him in shock. In 32 years, I'd never heard my father stand up to my mother about anything. "You threatened to leave," he nodded. "I'm 62 years old, Amber. I almost died earlier this year. Made me realize I don't want to spend whatever time I have left enabling behavior that destroys relationships. Claire is almost 30 and still living at home with no job. Your mother is so focused on protecting her that she's willing to lie and manipulate. This isn't healthy for anyone." "What did Mom say?" I asked. "She's agreed to counseling. Claire is furious about it, thinks we're ganging up on her, but I told them both that things have to change." He paused. "I also told your mother she needs to apologize to you publicly, to everyone she lied to, and Claire needs to apologize for taking credit for something you did." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think this would actually change anything, but I'd spent too many years hopping for my parents' approval to trust easily now. "Dad, I appreciate you coming here, but I need more than promises. I need to see actual change." He nodded. "I understand, and I'm not asking you to forgive everything right away. I just wanted you to know that I see what happened, I acknowledge my part in it, and I'm trying to fix it." After Dad left, I sat on my couch for a long time, processing everything he'd said. Part of me wanted to be hopeful, to believe my father was finally going to be the parent I'd always needed. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and disappointed so many times, remained skeptical. Actions mattered more than words, and I'd seen precious few actions to support all these promises. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Mom. "I'd like to meet for coffee, just the two of us, please." I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won out. We met at a cafe near my office on a Wednesday afternoon. Mom looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her coffee cup, not meeting my eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm here," I said neutrally. "What did you want to talk about?" Mom took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, Amber. Several apologies, actually. What I did, lying about who paid for your father's surgery, telling family members you refused to help, it was wrong, completely wrong. I waited, saying nothing. She needed to say all of this without me making it easier. I've been in therapy for the past 2 weeks, Mom continued. Individual sessions and couples counseling with your father. My therapist helped me see that I've been enabling Claire's dependence and punishing you for being independent. I convinced myself I was helping both of you, but really I was just avoiding the hard work of teaching Claire to stand on her own. She finally looked up at me. I'm sorry, Amber. I'm sorry for lying, for manipulating the family, for taking credit away from you and giving it to your sister. You paid for your father's surgery without hesitation, and instead of thanking you, I used it to further a false narrative about Claire being responsible. That was cruel and it was wrong. I sat there feeling emotions I couldn't quite name, relief that she was finally acknowledging the truth, anger that it had taken this long, sadness that our relationship had deteriorated to this point. What about Claire? I asked. Has she apologized? Mom's expression tightened. Claire is struggling with this. She's angry at your father and me for going to therapy. She feels like we're taking your side. This isn't about sides, I said firmly. This is about truth and accountability. Claire lied and took credit for something she didn't do. That's not a difference of opinion. Mom nodded slowly. You're right, and I've told her she needs to make this right. She's not ready yet, but I'm working on it. We talked for another hour. Mom explained how the therapist was helping her understand her patterns of behavior, how she'd been so afraid of Claire falling apart that she'd tried to cushion every failure and setback. But all I did was make her weaker, Mom said, and I made you feel invisible. I left that coffee meeting feeling cautiously hopeful but still guarded. Words were just words. I needed to see sustained change before I could trust again. Over the next few months, I watched from a distance as my parents' household slowly transformed. Dad started setting boundaries. Claire got a part-time job, just retail work, but it was something. Mom went to therapy every week and actually seemed to be working on herself. In November, 6 months after Dad's heart attack, Mom sent a group email to the entire extended family. It was a public apology, stating clearly that she had lied about who paid for Dad's surgery, that I had covered all the costs, and that she deeply regretted spreading false information. She didn't explain why she'd lied, just that it was wrong and she was sorry. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Claire never apologized, not directly anyway, but about 3 months after that disastrous family dinner, she sent me a text. I'm working on myself, therapy and stuff. Maybe we can talk sometime. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. Baby steps, I guess. As Thanksgiving approached, Mom called to invite me to dinner. I understand if you're not ready, she said, but we'd love to have you if you're comfortable. I thought about it for several days. Finally, I decided to go, not because everything was fixed, but because I wanted to see if the changes were real. Thanksgiving dinner was awkward but civil. Claire was polite, Dad was attentive, and Mom actually asked about my work and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. It wasn't the warm family reunion some people might imagine, but it was honest, real, a starting point. As I drove home that evening, I realized something important. I didn't need my family's approval anymore. I'd spent so many years chasing their validation, trying to earn love that should have been freely given, but I'd built a good life without their support. I'd helped my father because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything in return. The hospital records I'd kept in my purse that day, the proof I'd been ready to show everyone, represented more than just payment receipts. They represented my willingness to stand up for truth, to refuse to be erased or rewritten. And that strength didn't come from my family. It came from years of taking care of myself, of building something solid and real. My sister had lied, my mother had enabled it, and my father had stayed silent. But in the end, the truth had come out. Not because justice always prevails or families always do the right thing, but because I'd refused to let them rewrite history. Sometimes standing up for yourself means losing people you love. Sometimes it means accepting that your family will never be what you hoped they'd be. But it also means knowing your own worth, regardless of whether anyone else recognizes it. As I pulled into my driveway that Thanksgiving evening, I looked at my little house with its fresh paint and refinished floors. every improvement made with my own hands and my own money. This was what I'd built, a life of independence, integrity, and truth. And no lie, no matter how many times it was repeated, could take that away from me.